it's oftentimes people I meet in, like, professional settings, and I don't know if it's because they're putting on a facade.
Other
Um,
threes?
yeah, it could so I'm starting to wonder if it's other threes because it feels very much like I don't actually know what's there. I'll be
Oh,
talking to them and it's, like, very awkward, and I don't know where to lead, and, like but they also don't know where to lead, so
you're
it's
both doing the same thing.
yeah, so it's
That's what
almost
happens with me in nines. Is
really?
I mean, it's not the same thing, but it's similar in that there's sort of this elemental problem of of well, with nines, it's nines are kind of looking for somebody else to be the engine, for somebody else to be the catalyst, galvanizer,
Mhm.
something. And when there's two nines, it's yeah, it's
There's no movement.
it's just two floating people, and so what are we supposed to do here? Kind of thing. Yep.
the big hormone Enneagram.
Let me lay it on the line. I got a little freakiness inside. Let you know that the man has got to deal with it.
I find fascinating that I keep seeing that sort of changing or dying off is, I've always been interested in politics from the point of view of the influence of ideology. Like, I don't really give a shit about like so and so said this today, or this is the new law rolling out. But in terms of like how politics and economy shapes um, the way we think, sort of the memes and filters we have. And so anyway, even today I was depressed because I was following the Instagram Enneagram hashtag, and
Oh, why would you do
so-
that?
somebody posted some comparison between Trump and Obama and said, they were making kind of an like a not interesting, but they were making a point about the difference in their types, but they said, but I don't want to alienate either side, and I was like, why not? Like, fucking alienate white nationalists. Like, do it. Like, do it. Like, don't like so there's a little
Right.
bit of that like hangover of like, let's sort of preserve a kind of a thing, which is like a very kind of what I feel like we're getting at is like something that we've talked about, especially you and I, Emeka, of when we're talking about like the push for quote unquote diversity in the
Oh
Enneagram
yeah.
field. And part
Cool.
of what as I see it, what alienates a lot of people who are not white and straight from engaging with the Enneagram is that a lot of the Enneagram field, as it currently stands, is couched in a kind of white middle class value system and a white middle class professional veneer.
Yeah.
And so there's this sort of sense of we want more people of color and of different expressions of and lifestyles and cultures, but also play on our terms of what's professional, acceptable, and
Hmm.
uh,
Yeah. Not to shit on that too much, but that it's kind of like a company recognizing that they need to increase diversity or something like that, or appeal to a younger, or a politician knowing that they need to appeal to a younger vote voting sector, and like maybe Hillary going on some hip hop podcast and talking about how she has hot sauce in her purse, something ridiculous like that, or it doesn't have the spirit of whatever it is that would innately attract people from that group. So it's like, oh, I want to appeal to younger people, but I'm going to make them jump through these ridiculous hoops that they would never jump through, instead of actually like trying to empathize or actually relate to people that are different from you and relating to them on those terms.
well, yeah, I feel like there is a unspoken way that a certain white middle class professionalism um, kind of not language necessarily, but just a whole style or zeitgeist
Yes.
is over the whole thing, and so it doesn't encourage people who are not part of that to engage with it because it's sort of like, hey, here's the Enneagram, but you can engage with it in our own style.
Yeah.
And so, like, how do you open it up in a way that, like, you're actually making space for other people's style of thinking and expressing themselves? And, like, I mean, I don't have to tell you as a Black person of how, like, you know, there's that kind of white expectation of how a Black person should express themselves,
Yeah.
of like they're being too loud or whatever, like, or, like, or when white people, like, are like, oh, I love the funky spice, know? And it's like, oh yeah, that's the Blackness I like, whatever. But it's true. There's this sort of style of that. Like, I mean, men have it with women, and it's like, oh, I'm honoring the goddess or whatever, and it's a way of being like, I'm pretending to honor you, and maybe I'm sincerely trying to, but I don't know how to get past my own lexicon and my own style. I'm not actually like making space for you to show up on your own terms. I'm kind of like setting the terms that I want you to get on the stage with me for. You know what I'm saying?
Here's the thing. On like our generation and younger, or whatever you want to call Generation Z, the internet, there's no gap between, like, a trend happens in one subgroup and if it's cool, another subgroup picks it up and adopts it very, very quickly. So what one person might consider Black culture, things are being so hybridized that young kids are just picking up anything that's interesting that they see on social media, regardless of where it originates. And so this idea that, oh, we need to appeal to diverse groups and younger groups, it's so out of touch with what's currently happening in this day and age, that everyone's mixing ideas and are mixing. So like memes start out in one subgroup and it ends up in every other subgroup, or trend starts out in the Black community and it ends up being adopted by everyone else. Things are just mixing so quickly that, so when I hear this concept of, oh, we need to become more diverse, it's like you're so out of touch that you don't realize that you just have to jump in the pool of
Yeah.
mixing that's already happening. Like
Well, it's
you don't have to like delineate and say we need to
No.
actually say something different to these
It
groups
should
of
just be
people.
happening.
It's like we need to actually, yeah,
Yeah.
just like relate to people as they're talking. Like
It's a very like heady kind of way to attack it. They're like, let's step back and think about how to do this, and we're all just sitting here like, just have a conversation, guys.
yeah,
think-
like
You're good.
yeah, like, just these big companies recognize on social media that there's a meme culture, and so like that's like, okay, we need to appeal to younger people. Well, a practical way to do that is to actually speak to young people the way that they speak to each other. So you need to get somebody to handle your social media. So you have all these huge companies that have, I'm sure, teens or millennials handling their social media, putting out these really funny responses that go viral. And that's how you do that. You actually talk to people the way that they talk.
Right.
So I feel like the Enneagram really fucking needs that. Just someone who gets it, and that's part of what we're doing is bringing some personality and just current ways of expressing yourselves. As sometimes people have reacted to the Not a Four Instagram page, like, are you supposed to do this with the Enneagram? Like, how is this person doing this? Like, they're in shock because there's nothing in the Enneagram that expressing itself with the same kind of humor that that is completely normal on just Twitter or
Yep.
Instagram, or just, this is what people are doing. It's
Well-
not even those jokes aren't even a quarter savage as some of the shit that I see on my timeline.
No,
Not even
totally.
close.
The not a four thing is like so kid gloves. And it's
Yeah.
it's usually just gentle teasing, but
Yeah.
there is something to be said about, like, the Enneagram does take you to deep places and vulnerable places, and we all struggle with being aware of ourselves. And so, like, I totally part of really working with people with the Enneagram is helping them to feel safe and seen for who they are. And so that, that like the kind of the razor's edge you have to walk is how do you stay a person and how do you stay humorous and earthy and yourself and authentic while at the same time being sensitive to where people are at and what they're going through and the things that can come up and the shame and we talked last time I think, about Christians and I know a lot of I guess they're called evangelicals or refugees from Christianity, and I think ourselves included in some way. And there's a lot of ways that they've been gaslit and not able to trust themselves and not develop certain parts of themselves because of the constraints they've been in, and then you know you got there's a bridge there, and so I think that's like our kind of responsibility is to be humorous in ourselves and fun, and because I mean no matter what, Enneagram is going to get more and more savage,
Oh yeah.
and I mean when I first learned the Enneagram, I was like 18, I was naive as fuck, and I joined the Riso Hudson message board on their website. It's not up anymore, and I was like, hello everybody, I'm a sexual 4 with a 5 wing, hello. Not knowing that that was a popular mistype and not knowing that there was anything around that, I just thought that's how, oh, that's what I am. And I remember people were so fucking brutal with me. Like,
that was a brutal board.
So brutal. It was, yeah, totally. And, and I remember how fucking shocked I was. Like, whoa, I'm just saying type. And I came to understand some of their point of view. I still think there was a lot of assholes and whatever, but I think that what we're basically doing a pretty good job of balancing being real and humorous and using the word penis and Enneagram in a sentence and not having the world fall apart, and not destroying the spiritual potency and not pretending that spirituality is suddenly when we dress in robes and look longingly in each other's eyes for too long and talk about the goddess and stuff. And how we're trying to balance that and the sensitivity, and that's part of being a fuller human, is not compartmentalizing these parts of ourselves or putting them at war with each other, but how do I bring my humor and my my sexuality and my aggression, and how do I bring my higher qualities and my presence and the things beyond me, and how do I put them into an integrated whole and own the parts rather than keep more separation between them? And what parts of me have to educate other parts of me? So I'm sure being offensive is not necessarily, depending on who's getting offended and over what, it's not necessarily a bad thing. But how do we offend the right people, and how do we hold what's real in people without just getting jaded and oh, that fucking fuck whatever, and shitting on people's self-exploration and where they need something. Everybody's traumatized, everybody's vulnerable, and everybody feels ashamed, and they feel rage, and they feel anxious, and sorry, go ahead.
I look at it in a similar way in the way people react to political satire, like Saturday Night Live, or your dad's work with those cartoons, that people get identified with certain political ideologies, that when someone points out something valid, uh, like with humor, a criticism, people get really upset about it. And so they don't have the ability to laugh at themselves or laugh at something that is legitimately wrong or something that could be poked at, as a criticism or as satire, and they're just like, oh no, I'm upset. And in some ways, satire and humor, some things can only be said in that way.
Definitely.
Some things can only be communicated with humor. You can't illustrate some of how ludicrous the things that happen in the Enneagram community, that's the only way you can do it. I mean, you can, and sometimes that's the only way you can reach people, because you can have a book, you can have a blog post that'll get ignored, but the right meme that's funny, that kind of gets under someone's skin, that illustrates an idea or illustrates how ridiculous a viewpoint is the only way that it's actually going to like get someone to realize something.
Well, what I appreciate about your humor and the not a four thing is that you're not making fun of people, and you're
No,
not
yeah,
making fun of people's self-exploration. What you're making fun of is the undue and unnecessary pride people have in their either their self-typing
yeah,
or in their assumption of having complete knowledge.
yeah.
Mhm.
Like at the end of the day, it's
You're making fun of their egoism rather than themselves, you know.
right. It's about everything that's around the how much we've glorified this one type, to the point where people are not willing to let go enough of it to explore what else it might mean. And that even the suggestion, it's because it's proving the point, like the suggestion that what you think this type is isn't actually what it is, if you're upset by that, if you're defensive about that, rather than curious about what else you might discover, then you have your two ego invested in what you think this typing is adding to your identity, which isn't what this thing is about. So it's, the whole thing is illustrating it. Like being upset is illustrating the point of why it should exist, is pointing out that
Mhm.
you aren't looking at the thing that's important. Um, yeah, anyway.
Well, yeah. So one of the things that Emeka is referencing for anybody listening to our obscure uh, in-group talk is he made a hilarious Instagram account called Not a Four, where he pokes using humor, like talks about what a four is versus misconceptions around it, because for whatever reason in Europe, North America, and Australia, especially, a lot of people mistype as fours, and something like, I would guess, like maybe 70% of
Mhm.
people that initially see themselves as four are not.
At least half,
At least
minimum,
half. At least half.
minimum.
And there's a lot of social and cultural reasons for that, I think, and we can blah 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 go into that. But one of the uh, one of the main points that is very funny to me, that comes up, that upsets people a lot, is, fours and not. So is the comment that fours are just naturally empathetic.
Yep.
And Emeka often makes fun of how fours are not naturally empathetic. They have that quality, but fours are naturally self-absorbed. And I think any real four sees that that has been a lifelong struggle. For example, I consider myself very empathetic, uh, just generally, but I notice that I am very selectively empathetic. So I can feel a great amount of empathy for homeless people, and I'll have steering fucking hatred for um rich people or the military or whatever. And when I'm in a more awake state, I can have a kind of clean empathy with everybody. But with a nine, for example, nines have a lot of superego investment in being empathetic. Generally speaking, not every nine, but I think a lot of nines do, and they naturally absorb feel impressions from other people, making them natural empathizers, even in the average levels of health.
Mhm.
And so, calling attention to how pissy and judgmental and uh, mean fours can be, I think is kind of funny. And I don't take it personally at all. Whereas a lot of people who mistype as four, like, no, fours are super empathetic. And they're coming from this very angry place, which is hilarious. Like,
Mhm.
it's like that they're kind of not practicing what they preach. I'm not saying all empathy needs to be nice, but like, there's this like, you, they're not saying it like this usually, but they're like, you fucking jerk. I'm
Yeah.
empathetic. You can feel
And
the
I know
anger
for
and
and I know
resentment
for
in
sure
this.
I'm a four is what they're saying too at the same time, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's the other thing that really illustrative, is that just the suggestion, because usually, almost all the time, what you're suggesting is that what you think 4 isn't actually what you think it is. Like there's more to it than what you think it is. And just the suggestion always brings up this defensive, but I'm sure I'm a 4. Well, no one said anything about what your typing was.
Right.
The suggestion that what you thought 4 was or isn't is such a threat to your own self typing, self concept, because what it's suggesting is that if you identified with 4 based on this idea that's incomplete, and maybe you identified with the wrong type.
Right.
But and that is such a threat. That is such a threat that they have to immediately assert that.
The only way you learn the Enneagram is by discarding your first, second, third, fourth, and whatever, et cetera, impression of all the types of what the Enneagram is.
Yeah.
You know, you have to keep discarding what you think you know.
Mhm.
You have to discard what you think your type is. You have
Yep.
to always be questioning. And, you know, you reach a certain point where you're like, I'm pretty fucking sure. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody's going to dispute that knows me that I'm a 4. I think people initially sometimes think I'm something else because I can be a little bit more, you know, I could be kind of 5-ish or whatever. But it's pretty clear I'm a 4. But at the same time, like, I need to be open to even what does that fucking mean to be a
Yeah.
4. Like I'll know very clearly I'm a heart type. I'll know very clearly I'm a withdrawn type. I'm a reactive type. I'm, you know, X, Y, and Z that fit all this category. I can know my own experience and be like, well, compared to other people, Jesus Christ, 4 is like where I'm at, and that's the themes and da da da. But at the same time, like, I mean, I've known the Enneagram for over 10 years, and I'm still learning new stuff and even refining. Like you get a little tiny piece, like a little
Mhm.
tiny puzzle piece, and then suddenly the whole image
Mhm.
of what you think you're looking at changes.
Yep.
Mhm.
Same thing happens for me with, just you constantly learning. And I remember some experiences I've had in the past year or so with some other 8s or female 8s that have been romantically interested in me that helped me see myself or see my 8 patterns more clearly, because I could see someone doing something that I've recognized in myself that I didn't understand before. So like the line to 5 and 8s sort of needing to pull back to see if you still care,
Mm.
or like if you
Mm.
even give a fuck about them. I mean, people talk about the line to 5, but it's like I didn't really understand what that would look like, and how I was doing the same thing. Whereas you have to actually, there's a point where an 8 will pull back to see if you will sh- prove to them that you actually care that they exist. And in a romantic situation, it's very obvious when that's happening. I've seen that happen in like a very micro situation where it's like we just met and this thing is happening, and I can see that if I don't show you that I'm interested enough, you're going to give up, and or you're going to just stop the whole thing, and it's a very like hard stop.
That's why I send you heart emojis every time.
so it was kind of an interesting thing. It's like, oh yeah, this is this hard wall that an 8 will retreat back into. And there's ways that I'm doing that. It's like, oh, I need you now, and if you're not there, it's like, all right, I'm done. This is it. I've completely given up on this whole thing. And so like there's just all these little angles and little insights that are revealing themselves about all the types just based on the years and years of thinking about it, that sometimes like you realize something that completely changes the way you thought about that type before. And so it's just hilarious to me to see how invested people are in their concept of what 4 is based on just a couple things that are very easy to poke holes in, and those couple ideas um they're so invested in, and they're not interested in anything more. So it's not like, hey, oh, that's an interesting new insight on type 4, can you tell me more about that? No.
Right.
It's how dare you say that about 4s.
And also, it's like, you know, most people look at type from the lens of traits and, you know, descriptions, and they're like, oh, well, that description fits me better than other descriptions. But
Yeah.
descriptions and traits are a pretty lousy way to understand and learn about the types. Like, they're an entry point, and I think they're sort of necessary for getting it, getting a feel for, oh, there's something to this. But comparing it, like, besides reading a million terrible descriptions, it doesn't exist in us as a bunch of traits. That's not what it is. That's not what
That's
our type
true.
is.
Yeah.
And so traits are important, and they help. It's like, oh, I'm, in the fucking endless. Is Trump an 8 or a 3? Oh, you'd be like, is Trump efficient? Fucking no, he's not. Like there's things like that you can point to.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, like I think I talked about it on one of the calls like I have a 5 wing in my tri-type. I also have a 5. I'm around a lot of 5s. I have 5s in my family, and Ilaria pointed out the role of avarice in 5, and in a way that like completely illuminated 5 for me. That avarice isn't just like, oh, I withhold my feelings, and I withhold myself because I'm easily overwhelmed. Because I was like, man, 5s are actually like, they're not these like fragile little things.
No.
5s often overwhelm me, and they're often very aggressive, but intellectually aggressive. And I was like, it doesn't make sense that, like, you always talk about 5 as like, oh, they're just like little wispy fragile things. And I was like, what? No, that's not. I don't know. Didn't match my experience, and yet I couldn't explain it. I couldn't figure out what was the connection between the aggression and this thing I understood as avarice. And then Ilaria mentioned the kind of control that avarice is, where I won't approach a certain, like, if we start talking like an unhealthy 5. If the topic goes into something that I don't feel like I know much about or have much orientation to or experience with, and I'll shift the topic or I'll just withdraw, which is an aggressive act also. And that sense of like how I'm controlling and limiting my experience, like, opened up the whole sense of how the ego of the 5 works. I like understood the high parts, but the low parts, I could see the traits, behaviors, strategies, but I couldn't piece it together. And that like radically changed my idea of 5.
Yeah, 5 is an inversion of 1.
Nancy, what about you?
It's a controllingness.
Nancy, what about you in 3? Like,
there's a delay here. Sorry.
What a dick.
I don't know how the call is working.
Oh my god, that is so funny. What were you saying to myself?
I was asking about your experience of type 3, and realizing if there's some new things you've realized about 3, and you being a 3, like some new insights that you didn't realize maybe a year ago.
Well, I have to make sure David's not going to interrupt me again.
This is how 9s are.
Canceled.
David, you have been voted off the island.
Are you even a 9, David?
Yeah, you see. We need to have that conversation.
You're trying to just brainwash all these 9s to think, or
They're
4s to think that they're 9s. Like, you need to stop, man.
Need to slow down. Let's see. That's a good question. Well, I think one of the interesting things I learned when I was in the narrative training was the actual way of, deceit plays out. Because whenever someone would describe a 3, they're like, oh, well, deceit is part of a 3. And I'm like, I don't deceive people. I don't just go around lying. But it's something interesting that came up in the group of 3s that I was with was that it's not so much that we're lying, we're just pulling out different parts of ourselves. And so a lot of 3s in my experience are very multifaceted. On purposely multifaceted, so that when we're in these situations, we can, pull out whatever side of us that we need to pull out instead of like whatever's there right now. So I think that's an interesting way that we kind of place an inflection on the word deceit.
Say more about what you mean.
How do you do it? How do you think you do it?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so I have a lot of examples. I'm trying to pick one that's more appropriate. So, um, like I did sales for a long time. So I was direct sales, like door to door shit.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I was like talking to a a housewife, I would talk a lot about like their kids and their dog and like, be very like, oh wow, that's very interesting and kind of girly and timid. Whereas if I were with the husband, I would talk more about sports and, the football teams that I know about and, be much more like tomboy ish,
Hmm.
where I could be both sides because I am both girly and tomboyish and know about football and the best nail polish.
Question. Um, are you I'm trying to figure out, I think David has mentioned this about threes being able to have like a um direct sense of you, like an image center, direct line to what you're about. So I'm trying to figure out, is your ability to adapt to this person, is that based on the idea that you can read them pretty much from the jump?
Yeah, most of the time I can read almost anybody.
So tell me about that. Like, is it like you're getting an image center impression of what this person is about? Like, what is that? Like, so you get on a call with the housewife. Is it that you've got an image of them? Like, what is your experience of being able to read them?
So in my more recent experiences, it's more of an energy. Um, hmm, that's hard. So it's more of like an energy. So um, it's like I'm sinking to their energy field. Like wherever they sit on that energy field, I can sink into it,
Hmm.
like sync up with it, and
Sync
kind of
as in SYNC.
yes, SY, not SI.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm.
sync
Strikes
up.
me as a very interesting progression from 9 to 3. Just
Yeah,
energetically,
like
of like,
riding that
I
line.
I think a lot of what sloth is keeping myself fragmented, and like, so there's the deceit there where there's, but it's from a different center. You know,
Hmm.
body center fragmentation versus emotional centers, different images that I pull out. I think Achazo called, I mean, yeah, Naranjo called social 9 adaptability. And nines are so much more adaptable than threes. Threes are
Mhm.
like can get a new skill or something, but it's that like the new part of me comes out depending on the situation, but it's hard for me to get all my selves in order. Whereas the three can really galvanize all themselves,
Mhm.
but it's different facet of the image expressed. But then in terms of synchronizing, I mean, there's the 9 and 3 thing going on right there too.
Hmm.
So
And it's
okay.
very like pleasurable when I can sync up with someone. It's like, yes, I know you. So
Mm,
it's like I get something out of it too.
So what if you
interesting.
meet someone and, I don't know, let's say that they're specific enough in a certain way that you're doubtful that you can sync up with them. Has that ever happened to you, that you don't know quite how to sync up with them? Or do you feel like you can always find a way, or find the parts of yourself that to mirror this person?
There is a type of person that I can't sync up with, and I don't know what it is, but it is a certain type of person, and I can't get it.
Hmm.
And it's
Example.
um
Me.
no, you're pretty easy, David. um yeah, no, David's easy. Um so there's like it's oftentimes people I meet in like professional settings, and I don't know if it's because they're putting on a facade,
Other
Um,
threes?
yeah, it could. So I'm starting to wonder if it's other threes because it feels very much like I don't actually know what's there. I'll be
Oh,
talking to them and it's like very awkward and I don't know where to lead and like but they also don't know where to lead. So
you're
it's
both doing the same thing.
yeah, so it's
That's what
almost
happens with me in nines.
really.
I mean, it's not the same thing, but it's similar in that there's sort of this elemental problem of well, with nines, it's nines are kind of looking for somebody else to be the engine, for somebody else to be the catalyst, galvanizer,
Mhm.
something. And when there's two nines, it's it's
There's no movement.
it's just two floating people, and so what are we supposed to do here? Yeah, kind of thing. Yeah,
Trying to communicate, I don't
yeah,
know.
yeah,
Yeah, so I often have thought it's other threes that I
makes
meet.
sense.
Yeah.
So, do you get the sense that you are? It's not like you've. It's not like a nine where they feel like they're losing themselves as they're
Mhm.
absorbing this person. You still feel like I'm still me. I'm just showing them a part of me, right? Like,
Correct. Yeah, like this is one part of me. They don't get to know the whole thing. That's just for me, but they can see this side.
how does that play out romantically?
Um, well, so it takes a while for well, okay. It plays out romantically in the way that there are often bombs dropped on the relationship throughout the relationship. Like, oh, by the way, there's this side of me too.
Oh, okay.
And
Like,
yeah.
how
Mm.
do like can you give an example?
Um
Bomb.
well, so I
That stuff you have in that closet.
yeah, that stuff I have in that closet. Um, so like in my current relationship, it's like coming out, oh, by the way, like, oh, I'm bi, or like, here's that part of me, or
Mhm.
like, they're just like different facets of me that aren't obvious that like people need to know if they're going to be romantically involved with me, but nobody else needs to know in my mind,
Mm.
kind of thing.
So it's more like as the relationship progresses, it's like, well, I guess if we're gonna be this close, you might as well.
Like, yeah,
It,
like you can't like move in with me and not know this shit about me. Like it's just
mm,
not cool.
hmm.
Yeah.
It's funny how like versus the eight thing where I'm just like, I'm gonna
Here's all of it.
bombard you. I'm gonna bombard you with all of that shit from. Oh, you don't like
Oh
it?
man.
You never liked me.
You never loved me.
Yeah, the especially the sexual aid has this like, can you handle me?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, very like in your face.
yeah, I'm bi. You like
Down
that?
with that?
Because it's sort of a pre-rejection thing as a rejection type. It's like, oh no, I'm feeling vulnerable because I kind of like this person. Let me get them to reject me.
Mhm.
I'm still working on that,
Oh man. That must be interesting.
man. I'm just like, yeah, you know what? I'm just not gonna do much. Try not to scare this person. Yeah.
But I think people read in sexual aids, that I mean, I think especially all sexual rejection types is like, I want you to reject me, baby. Like
Mm,
reject me so hard.
hmm
And and I'm gonna make sure that happens by like overdoing it, especially for 2 and 8. And then for 5, it's like overdo it here and not do it all here. Like
Yeah.
the conditions in terms of the control of where I'm going to engage with you are very set here and they're not happening here.
Yeah. I've had a lot of experiences with threes, and um, my impression, at least from an eight standpoint, is that there's a way that they're editing out. I mean, all the image types are editing, but with three is they're presenting the aspects of a situation that um it's not necessarily positive or it's just, to me, it seems like you're leaving out important parts, certain parts that I think have to be part of the story. So it's like if something bad happens, um, a three might s- find a way to say that this was a good experience. This was a developmental.
We reframe.
Yeah, like sevens can do that too, like positively reframe it. But with
Yeah.
three, it's a little bit more like competent in a way that
Right.
this actually helped my development in this way, and it actually makes more sense. Sevens just want to skip over the shitty stuff, but
Right.
threes can find a very competent way to make a bad situation into a very grounded, real, like this was actually helpful.
hmm
I think of
And
it as athletic,
yeah, like
figuratively.
this failure
Yeah.
actually spurred me and made me tougher, and that's true. It's not like
Mhm.
any of these things are untrue, but as a reactive type, it's almost like, well, I mean, there's a shitty aspect of this meaning. We have to talk about that too. Like this actually sucked. It felt terrible.
Mhm.
Can we talk about that? It's like, no. It's like, don't be so negative. Like,
Why are you bringing that up?
I mean, it's about advancing. It's about getting better. So why do we need to talk about that? Let's just use
Right.
this experience as a way to improve. And I'm just like, well, I mean, it sucked though.
Yeah, but living in that suck slows you down, and ain't nobody got time for that.
Exactly. So it becomes. I have a lot of three friends who that becomes a point of a contentious point that point of friction just in the
Mhm.
ways of looking at things. My best friend is three fixed, and it's one of the big differences between us because I can sit in the suck all day long. Like I've come up with certain exercises, that creative exercises that are based on negativity that he can't, that he refuses or doesn't want to, or it doesn't work for him. I guess that's what he's told me. I just coming up with ideas based on the ways that things make you feel negative in a bad way, and he's like, well, that's not actually helping me come up with ideas. I just making me
What?
feel shitty. I was like, oh, okay.
Well, that makes sense.
Yeah. So I mean, there's a way that threes don't really. There's a level way that they want to focus on the thing that's going to help them get to the next thing, and like we can talk about the negative thing, but there's really no point in doing that if that's not going to help us get to the next thing.
Right. And in my experience, it's almost like a reflex. Like it's like a instant reframe.
Hmm.
Because it's like a survival instinct almost. Like I'll
Mm,
find myself if something bad happens, I know that like I'm pushing the emotions down. I'm like, well, like I realize I'm pushing the emotions down, but there's no real way for me to feel them
mm,
because it's so reflexive that it just happens. And I'm
mm.
like, I know I'm really sad about this, but for some reason, I'm not sad about this.
The thing though is that it doesn't. That doesn't mean that threes are cold because a lot of
No.
threes are sensitive, and
No, I
Mhm.
don't find threes cold at all unless they're like really unhealthy.
but it's that kind of weird thing where what you're describing, that you can push the emotions down, is in conflict with kind of the impression I get of a lot of threes, which is they're still personable, emotional types of people. But how do you experience that? Because you seem like a sensitive, emotional person, but how does that um, show up in you that you can push these feelings down, but you're still kind of not a cold person?
Well, emotions serve me a lot of times. So if the emotion serves me, I'm fine with experiencing it.
Hmm.
But it's if I think it's going to just bog me down and there's no real purpose to it, then I can kind of shut it down.
Hmm.
If that makes sense. So I can still be very emotional and have all of the emotions, but it's not. It's I don't know. I don't know how to
No,
I
I
explain
get
that.
it. I get it on some
I
level.
I think like you know the role of the heart center in threes is equivalent to the role of the body center in nines, where it's like split off from the other two centers.
Hmm.
So like I think uh yeah, I think what Nancy speaking to sounds like I can do and use my mind to support my doing. And then when I'm safe, I can feel. And then when I feel like that these are things or safe feelings, I can feel them in the moment because, like, I know threes, it can get very emotional just when they're in the right situation. It's like, well, the stereotype is that threes are cold and unemotional and calculating, and they're not at all. But yeah, I think they can put emotions that conflict with the ego agenda or the image that they're trying to present. They can put those aside.
Mhm. And that happens when I'm putting forward an image. But if
Mm,
I'm not
Mhm.
putting forward an image, if if I'm not caught up in my like threeness, like if I'm just hanging out with my boyfriend or, comfortable, then I can have all the emotions
mm,
Yeah,
very deeply.
I think of it like in contrast to four, because as a four, it's very hard for me to put my feelings and impressions aside to do something.
Mm.
Like, the more unhealthy a four is, the less functional they are, and they're dysfunctional because they can't get any space from their impressions, from their feelings, and this kind of thing, and they get more bogged down and dwelling on them, and so, like, I joke that my non-existent about my non-existent three wing, because it's like I can't. It's very hard for me to do like three things in a day, and that's because as a four, my like the fourth thing is like I'm gonna be as true to my fucking heart as possible, and that's a whole problem because you're grasping for the heart and you can't really grasp for it. It doesn't work
Mm.
that way, and that's why instead of like to grasp for it, I generate negative feelings to feel my heart there and be true to my negative feelings.
Mhm.
But in contrast to three, it's like we all know that if we're too dwelling in our feelings, we can't get things done. And so three understands that, and they can use that when they're healthy to their advantage of all right, I can put my feelings about this aside and I can just do what I got to do. But it becomes a chronic habit and exaggerated, and uh, it becomes a way that I'm not able to give my heart the kind of space it needs to surface because I'm afraid of not only what will come up, but I'm afraid that it won't be there when I need it.
Mhm.
I think 3, 6, and 9 also have a very elemental underlying duty to the collective, is one way to say it also. And like nines, it's at some almost environmental level that nines are holding space and energy, or they feel they're supposed to be.
mm.
And they're, do, doing a little bit of both, right? Either doing it in some way just in their bodies, and it maybe does actually affect environments through body language somehow, or maybe there is something going on underneath, at an energetic level to a collective situation or something. But threes, it's some sense of needing to be the flag bearer of hope and for the collective. Does that
Mhm.
make sense? Like I'm like can do, you know what I mean? We can do this, and let's keep striving upward up the mountain or something. And
Right. The
hearts,
the saying like if not me then who or something, whatever that saying is, like
yeah,
that's a very like that's a three thing,
yeah.
I feel like.
And
Huh.
like six, it's sort of guardian kind of energy, you know, that kind of thing, like communicator for the collective. And uh I don't know, I don't have the words right now for six, but
Watchdog.
watchdog. Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, I mean, I think sixes have a real sense of responsibility that, like, sort of like threes. If it doesn't, if no, like, I got to make sure that I'm keeping awake because
Mm-hmm.
other people letting shit slide.
Yep.
But it's a little bit more like in the background. So, like,
Mm-hmm.
working with Julie, she's a six, and she's always talking about that sense of like really, super ego type, like really punishing sense of responsibility that like other people are gonna let this thing sink, and it's gonna sink, you know. And she decided to work with a 4, and, and it's just,
Who lets shit sink
Where everything sinks.
everything's sinking.
into the
And-
pit?
The abyss.
So she was actually, it was really funny. I just came from meeting her, and what did she say? There was always a thing that she had a certain kind of anxiety about when we started working together, that I was going to get too weird and esoteric and off-putting. And there's always this feeling, she said, of needing to not correct me, but like kind of find a way that I like the way I express myself, or the things I'm coming with aren't too whatever weird or deep or obscure or whatever. And then she said that now that she's been working with me for like 2 years or whatever, that like there was some thing where she was partnered with another woman who was like, I don't know how this is gonna go. I don't know, trying to figure out how their thing that they're working on together is gonna go. And she was like, who cares? Like, let's go really into this or whatever. And so we've rubbed off on each other, because I'm much more like, I got to get this submitted by the time this is required, like, I got to make this clear, and so it's cool. But yeah, she's got that sense of like that there, there's like something that needs to keep going, and I have to be keeping it going because no one else is responsible enough.
John, I think you've done a really good job of like having presenting balance in these definite, like you have some awareness, like, okay, this might not sound the best, so let me say some shit that makes me sound like someone that should be paid for workshops,
Like a teacher or something like that.
Yeah. So I mean, I think you don't have to worry about that. I think you've done plenty to balance things out. So
cool. Yeah, I figure when my book's out, people hear my voice in that regard, like.
Right.
Okay.
What
works for Princess Nancy?
7 or 8 works for me on Tuesday.
Let's aim for 8, because I have a meeting in the fucking afternoon, because I'm always in meetings.
Oh.
All right.
Cool.
7 or 8 o'clock.
8 o'clock on Tuesday.
Nancy got aroused by the word meeting. Notice that.
Yeah, you just talk to me more about meetings and see where that goes.
Ooh.
Ooh, tell me more.
I think based on what we were talking about today for the second half of the call, the outro should be like, did this place drop the bomb on me? No, you dropped the bomb on me by the Gap Band.
Oh, well, that is not something I know about. So.
What the fuck is going on?
Oh, that noise? That's my dog's toy.
I thought it was a song.
No,
That should be the outro, just my dog squeaky toy.
You